Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back. I remember the first time that I was asked to learn a waltz by Chopin. There was one thing I couldn't get my head around, and that was the idea of a dance to which one was not supposed to dance. You see, the point which seems so obvious to us now of such music is that it sounds like it has elements of a traditional dance form, but if you actually try to apply the traditional dance form in terms of people actually dancing in movement to this music, it simply doesn't work, because Chopin's waltzes in our tradition are played with a very variable tempo, which makes it quite impossible to actually dance to. Now, this is a concept which, as I said, seems obvious, but actually, if you look at it, is quite a strange thing. What is the point of writing dance music that's useless for dancing? So let's look back into history. We start with real dance music, which has probably always existed. I would say that even until 1,000 years ago, much of this dance music was not notated, and it probably had certain conventions which were quite easy to understand and to replicate and to imitate. Then, at a certain point, composers of music, which is a concept that exists because, firstly, of music notation, decided that they would write down these dances, and by being able to write them down, they could certainly make them musically, in terms of content, more complicated. At a certain point, it probably wasn't a sudden break, but more a kind of increasing disparity that led to a transition. These composers started writing similar music, which they continued to call dances, but which became so complex and so musically interesting, aside from their basis in the dance form, that they became standalone works of art. They became autonomous, so to say. So this has reached a kind of high point in the repertoire of the early 16th century, when we had dances of many nations, first and foremost among them the Pavan, which of course, based on its name, is a Mediterranean form, which came to the greatest musicians of the time, the greatest instrumental musicians, which, as we have seen, is a title to which the English virginalists have a very strong claim. And these musicians decided to adopt this form and to write music in it. I don't think much of this music was written in order to be danced to. I think by that time, the idea of the rhythm of this dance had already been abstracted from its original purpose and simply become a structure in which the composers could work. Of course, composition is something which is, one could say, easy to misunderstand, because the more rules you have in composition, the easier it is to write. The easiest music to write is entirely serial music, because the difficult thing about composing that one feels while composing is making choices. And if the choices are made for you by a system, then you can concentrate on the other things that make up your personality, such as expression and the flow of the music, without having to choose on a very mundane technical basis, on a basic level, what note you want to put next. Now, the structure of a dance is also this kind of decision-making machine, which can help a composer focus on other, more important things. But first, I would like to show you a pair of jigs, which show this very interesting dichotomy that we have been talking about, the dance that can be danced to and that which is abstracted. So the first one of this pair of jigs by Dr. John Bull is simply called a jig, and it starts roughly like this. I'm not going to play the rest of it because it's you can imagine how it goes. The second of it, of the pair, is the more interesting of them, and it takes the title John Bull's Grief. And of course, the grammar of titles back then was often a bit confused, so I think in the original it says something like Dr. John Bull's My Grief. But we get the idea. It's adopting the form of a jig with this rhythm, slowing it down, and making it express something quite apart from the idea of the jig. So you see, this is a piano piece, or let's say a keyboard piece, which simply adopts this idea of the jig rhythm and expresses something quite autonomous, standalone. So let's continue this exploration of dance forms in instrumental music. Now, I was saying that one of the most important dances in this milieu was the Pavan. Very often the Pavan was coupled with a Galliard. The Pavan is a slow dance in 4/time. Well, theoretically it has 3 strings of 8 bars or 16 bars, but the composers often were creative with that, and they made even 7-bar Pavans. I think there's one example of 11.5 bars. But let's say that the general standard Pavan has 8 bars. And the Galliard, when they are in a pair of Pavan and Galliard, is a dance that is in 3-time, where, according to the rule, so to say, 4 beats of the Pavan become 3 beats of the Galliard. Or was it 4 becoming 6? In any way, it's a simple proportion that makes the Galliard a faster dance of the same music. What does this mean, of the same music? Well, actually, according to the rule, as explained by Thomas Morley in his Plain and Easy Introduction to Practical Music, that's the name of the book, what he means is that the tune should be the same. You should take the same notes that were making up the melody of the first part of the Pavan and rearrange them so that they become suitable for this new rhythm of the Galliard, and make that the first tune in the Galliard. Now, the most refined composers, of course, did not always do this. But here we see the germ of a kind of variation form, which is quite different from the variation form that I showed you last time, for example, with 30 variations on Walsingham by John Bull. Here, between the Pavan and Galliard, we have a variation form, which means we have a bass line which is most likely the same, since the tune is the same, and we have a tune which is slightly modified in order to fit the rhythm, but we have 2 different tempos, 2 different movements. So I would like to show you an example of a Pavan and Galliard pair by William Byrd, possibly his most famous. It's slightly unusual for reasons which are not directly relevant to what we are talking about. And I would like to point out the very refined way in which the music of the Pavan becomes the music of the Galliard. First, let's hear it. Now, let me just point out a few salient aspects of this piece. It's the Pavan and Galliard in honor of the Earl of Salisbury, who was recently deceased at the time of the composition of this piece. So we see and hear that the Pavan is a kind of mournful music. It is what we could call a lamentation or a kind of funeral piece. And if we look at the second part of the melody of the Pavan, we see that it is taken again in the Galliard at exactly the same point, but it doesn't sound the same because the Galliard brings a discount over it, which is actually just an imitation. And let me show you. So in the Pavan we have now we go to the Galliard. We have again a bit of melody, which we're not talking about right now, and then it comes. You see it follows the same shape and it includes the same harmonies and it includes the same notes that have expressive meaning. But of course in the Galliard, because of the apparition of this top line, we get a quite different mood and a more sublimated expression. The second strain of the Pavan also becomes the second strain of the Galliard. We can see that by the fact that it has the same notes. So here the direct comparison. That in the Pavan and now in the Galliard. I hope this illustrates sufficiently the compositional process underlying this particular apparition in music history, the pair Pavan and Galliard. So let's go forward even more in time, and we jump, in this case, a few decades, and we arrive at what is sometimes called the first piece that consists of variations upon an original theme by Frescobaldi. I think this is actually not quite true because surely there is a piece by John Bull called Dr. John Bull's Good Night, which is an original tune with variations. And in any case, the transition between original tune with variations, original tune elaborated, and adopted tune with variations is such a fluid transition that I don't think these headlines of that was the first really have very much meaning. No, so we have this piece by Frescobaldi. What it is a theme with dances, and each of these dances follows what is roughly like the process I just outlined. That is, it takes the tune of the theme and it rearranges the notes in order to fit the rhythm of the respective dance, and it preserves the bass line, and most of all, it preserves the structure. So here we have what is really a theme and variations, as we know the term, which feature the kind of dance suite, as we know that term. So I must say, on a personal note, I do not entirely sympathize with Johann Sebastian Bach's evident love of Frescobaldi. So I'm not going to play this piece to you, but please do listen to it, played by somebody who really believes in it. I would rather jump now straight to Johann Sebastian Bach and his Goldberg variations. You probably know all of what I'm about to tell you, but I think as a basis, let me just briefly outline the structure in terms of dance forms in the Goldberg variations. I had said in a previous episode that the theme is a kind of saraband. And let me just show this again. And the first variation is something which we also know in classical music very well. Let me just tap out the rhythm of the accompanying line, and you will recognize what dance this is. So we have this Polonaise rhythm, which is offset by what is a very simple application of complementary rhythm. That is, we have two voices, one voice plays the Polonaise rhythm, the other voice plays simply a note everywhere the other voice does not play. That's variation number 1. Variation number 4 is also in 3-time and triple time, but twice as fast. And you could say that this dance is a kind of passe-pied. Variation 7, there's even a clue written in pencil, as far as I remember, in Bach's autograph, or in his copy of the Goldberg variations in print. And it says, in the tempo of a jig. Side note, this indication in the tempo of a jig has usually been taken to mean fast. And this is probably correct, but remember this jig by John Bull, which, based on the fact that it is an abstract jig and not a jig to be danced to, is actually slow. What do we notice about the numbers 1, 4, and 7? Well, they are 3 apart, and indeed, in the Goldberg variations, we have 3 kinds of variation. I think I said that last time. One kind is the canon. Those happen in variations 3, 6, 9, 12, so on. One kind is the exploration of virtuoso figuration, or keyboard-based arabesques. Those are variations, well, I guess you would say 2 mod 3. This will make sense to the mathematicians among you. And we are left, therefore, with the third kind of variation, which is what one could call the genre pieces. So dances, fixed forms in this culture that preceded the Goldberg variations in which Bach was immersed. These fixed forms include these dances I've just shown, and they also include things like the fugue, that's variation number 10, the French overture, that's number 16, and so on. Now, through this, we have thus covered all 3 types of variations that appear in this great work. And in so doing, we have, in a sense, made a tour of it. Now, next time, I will present to you the one thing that does not fit into this whole scheme, and that is the last element of this puzzle, so to say, and it's the quodlibet, variation number 30. So, as you can tell from the title, it means do whatever you want. That's what we'll do next time.